Good evening, everyone. A little bittersweet. Welcome to the last evening of the 2020 Tin House Summer Workshop online series. I'm Lance Cleland. I'm the director of the workshop. And for those of you just joining in for the first time, where have you been? You've missed an excellent 2 weeks of programming, many of which you can find on the same YouTube channel that you might be streaming from right now. The 2020 Summer Online Workshop was a culmination of basically 4 months of collaboration between our participants, our faculty, and Tin House staff. And so just want to reiterate what a great couple weeks it's been. And we're glad that the public has been able to tune in and share a little bit of the joy with us. As I mentioned, a little bittersweet, but also really excited to go off into the sunset tonight with 3 writers and faculty members that we've had the privilege of hosting at Tin House previously. So it feels only fitting that we're closing with some of our friends this evening. First up on the docket is our good friend, Hanif Abdurraqib, who of course is a poet, essayist, cultural critic from the Columbus, Ohio. He's the author of the poetry collections The Crown Ain't Worth Much and A Fortune for Your Disaster, out from Tin House Books last year. His first collection of essays, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, was released in winter of 2017 by $2 Radio. And he released Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest from University of Texas Press in February of last year. And that book, of course, became a New York Times bestseller. His latest project, which I've totally been enamored with and really diving into the last few weeks, is 68 to 05, where he's the editor and curator. And that project's a playlist project, that's what he refers to it as, which invites writers and readers alike to reflect and listen to songs and albums of any particular year from 1968 to 2005, hence the name. And in his introduction to the project, Hanif writes, "I wanted to do something that made me happy. This is the end result of that. I hope you dig it, and I hope you come around from time to time." And there's just something in that humility and invitation in that quote that captures so much of what I admire and am drawn to about Hanif's work. That call for collaborative exploration, the shared joy of discovery in a word or a line, or in this case, a song, the feeling of finding community in a poem, an essay, in a book. Hanif's work is always a welcoming, an invitation. And so I'm thrilled to return the favor this evening and bring him out to Tin House. Hanif, come behind the curtain and join us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lance. And that was so kind. And if you want to go to 6805, you can. Hopefully you find something cool there. It's a project that I started when I was living in Iowa in January. And at the time I thought, well, no one's going to give a shit about this except me. And had, much to my surprise, there have been people who give a shit about it. And so check it out. I'm feeling very good because I've turned in the copy edits for my next book, and it's like done, and that frees me up to do nothing if I want to. So I'm going to read something out of my next nonfiction book, which is called A Little Devil in America, which I feel like I should say that title comes from Josephine Baker's speech at the March on Washington. And I specify that because I think the March on Washington, and the history that gets taught about it, I think women are removed from it, I think it's when I found out that Josephine Baker spoke at the March on Washington, I was like, oh, what the fuck? No one, it seems like only men had that platform. And so I love Josephine Baker's speech. I also want to say thanks to Tin House for making this happen, and to Solmaz and Melissa for reading together, and for all of you for showing up. I've been thinking a lot about how what I miss most is collaboration, and how even I think the cultivation of intimacy is also a collaborative project. And I have felt alone in my quest to collaborate there as well. Anyway, I'm going to read maybe 2 or 2.5 sections from this piece from the book. It is called 9 Considerations of Black People in Space. 1. To be fair, I cannot claim that I love the moon as much as all my pals and ancestors and peers. I maybe do not love the moon as much as other poets who seem to love the moon for what it is capable of doing to the waters, or how it seduces the best or worst out of an astrological sign. I don't know much about astrology, but I do like the idea of astrology. Oh, I just realized this essay. Actually, I don't even know if Alyssa Washuta was faculty this time around or last time around, but shout out to Alyssa Washuta, who's a brilliant essayist who this essay mentions. I don't know much about astrology, but I do like the idea of astrology for what it brings out in my most creative and magically inclined friends. Alyssa, leaning eagerly over a table to ask me if I know the exact hour and minute of my birth, so that we might do my chart and finally get down to the issue of what's going on with all my emotional rattling about. Madison, scrolling furiously through her phone over a dinner to see what phase the moon is in, or what planets are twirling ever maniacally out of whack, so that she might explain to me why all the furniture in my heart's most precious corners has been upturned. Still, I can't say I'm much into what it all means, just that it means something, that we were all born under a different moon in a different sign, and I believe in it, I think. I have taken to waving a dismissive hand and telling friends, that's such a Virgo thing to say, even when I'm not entirely sure what I mean, and no one has corrected me yet, so either I'm right, or I have surrounded myself with immensely kind people, which is probably a very Scorpio thing to say. And besides, Robert Hayden loved the moon, and what a fool I would be to not love what Robert Hayden loved, not to drink from whatever his palms offered. And I too dig the moon most when it is a question of its functions. How, for example, I might have once slid underneath it in some alley on a clear night to better see the face of a dear brother, or to skim a phone number scrawled onto a napkin after spilling out of some dive. I wish to view the moon as Hayden viewed the moon, an object that has a purpose, rooted primarily in how it shines and little more beyond that. But still, I know that Black people in this country have long been obligated to a love for the moon, especially the enslaved who had to traverse the otherwise darkness in a search for freedom, aligning directions with the way the moon fell and following the shapes of stars. And so, even if it is sometimes a bit of a show off, every now and again puffing itself wide, sometimes blushing a gentle red, I do get the affection for the thing. Even when the moon is dragging me out of the house, interrupting a romantic movie night, bending into the potential for more romance so that we can all go out and stare. Then again, who am I to judge? I've picked through my own closet and opted for the crushed velvet or the bright red on a day where I am dressing for someone else's wedding. I've shown up to the high school reunion in sneakers that have cost more than I made in a week of work at a job slinging books. So I guess we're all the moon sometimes, depending on the occasion. And while we're here, I have to say that I also know nothing of the stars, but have lied about what I know many times. On the television once, a boy traced a constellation of freckles on a girl's face and then pointed at the sky, and she gasped with joy. And on a walk in my real life, holding hands with someone somewhere, I pointed up at the stars and pretended to know the shapes of them and said something about eyes and a promised future, and the person I was with laughed. So okay, I suppose I don't know the stars well enough to lie about them comfortably, but I did have a telescope once, bursting out of my top floor window during a time when I lived in a city that got less clogged with smoky haze during its nighttime hours, and I would look into it every now and then, searching for the shapes that everyone else saw, with no luck. From under a campfire, my friend Corinne said, "It's easy. The Big Dipper is right above us." And then she traced it out with her finger, but all I saw was a series of tiny explosions that never vanished. 4. I'm skipping ahead to 4. It is true that my beloved mother did not live long enough to get to go into space. And even if she had the opportunity, she likely wouldn't have made the trip. But she did have an afro. And on the days she'd get home from work and take off her hijab, she would sometimes pick it out and let it sit high for a whole evening. And from a distance, it resembled a black planet. And sometimes she'd sway in the kitchen and sing Miss Patti LaBelle, but it was never really the old Patti who, in the early 60s, toured through the Apollo Theater with Nona Hendrix and Sarah Dash in a group that would come to be called LaBelle once the labels got a hold of them. And LaBelle could sing, but that was only the half. And the other half was about the look, which they didn't always have. When they first started, they fumbled through a series of dresses and wigs that didn't always match their heads or bodies, and sometimes drooped down during their most energetic performances. In the early 70s, they dipped a toe into the UK and started wearing tight jeans and massive afros while cashing in on some of the more political soul music of the era. But in 1973, the group was spotted by designer Larry Legaspi. And I don't know when or where I first saw the video of LaBelle in those silver spacesuits. I want to say I first saw the clip of them singing Lady Marmalade on Soul Train, but it might have been the clip of them singing a song on Burt Sugarman's Midnight Special. Both of these performances happened a few years before I was born, but I do remember watching them on some old and creaking VHS with a label that had been written on and scratched out and then written on again. In the early 70s, Larry Legaspi had become convinced that fashion was going to be obsessed with a futuristic, space-age look, and that popular culture would follow. To get ahead of the curve, he began designing space outfits for musical acts, the first of them being Kiss and LaBelle. By the end of the 70s, the era of disco had taken some of Legaspi's influences, and the country had found itself newly infatuated with the cosmos, immersed in movies like Star Wars in 77 and the first Star Trek film in 79, which capitalized on the era's space craze after the original television series fell flat. And 3 seasons after the original television series fell flat, after 3 seasons in the 60s. Legaspi, it seemed, was right all along. And under his eye, in the early 70s, each member of LaBelle had their own unique space look. Sarah Dash had a silver crop top with wide, rounded shoulders and silver shorts, finished off with a pair of high platform heels. Nona Hendrix had a silver suit with an elongated diamond design peeling off the shoulder pads and stretching down to the pants. Patty herself wore a silver jacket with a massive consuming collar and silver platform boots stretching all the way up near her waist. This wasn't their only look, but it was their most memorable. On nights they didn't take to the stage draped in their spacesuits, they did it drowning in massive feathers, leaping out from every angle, from atop their heads or flaring out their backs. Some nights they would mix the two aesthetics, accenting a space-themed top with bright, massive plumage. It's funny, the last time I read this, I had it was when we could all gather, and I had a projector cycling through LaBelle photos, because I think if you have not seen photos of LaBelle during the Nightbirds era, it might be hard to visualize this, but go look them up whenever you can. The photos are just stunning. Anyway, in the most striking photo I recall, the trio is shot in black and white. Patty is in the center, flanked by Hendrix on her left and Dash on her right. The picture is from sometime in the mid-70s after LaBelle finally had their big breakout #1 song with Lady Marmalade, and their subsequent album Nightbirds became a hit. In the photo, Patty's hair, thick and wavy, rolls neatly along her head. The light in the picture makes her black hair look almost like it might be glowing. Nona's face is painted with a triangle of small dots starting at the top of her forehead and dancing down to her eyes, which are accented with an eyeliner, and it sparkles even though the photo lacks color. Sarah's ears are covered with feather-like jewelry. They are all wearing the half-smile and half-determined look that I'd known the black women in my life to wear before. It would be hard to know if they were smiling at all if not for Patty's overabundantly defined cheekbones and Sarah's dimples, which didn't need much temptation to make an appearance. And I found a framed version of this photo while antiquing once in a place where not many black people traveled, and I assume even fewer black people lived, and I'm mostly assuming this because I couldn't imagine any other way the photo lasted that long in the shop, especially at the price it was listed at, a paltry $2 when rang up on the loud, rattling register, and I kept it on my desk in 3 homes. I realized that what I like most about the photo is how, in that moment, they truly do look like astronauts, like perhaps underneath each of their arms might have been a helmet. In the videos of all their performances during the spacesuit era, I marvel, even now, at how smoothly they made it all look. Wearing all that heavy silver, adorned in all those feathers, they still moved as smoothly as they did in jeans and black sweaters. I think when you are young enough and impressionable enough, you maybe don't know much about what rests beyond the stars, and you imagine anyone can go, including yourself, or including a music group of black women who wore the costume well, including a person you love who sang along to songs by a member of that group from time to time. and surely danced to the group in a time before you were born. And I guess I have tricked you into reading about my mother again, and how I do not know if she wanted to go to space, but how I still wanted that for her. How, from time to time, I would catch her gazing at the stars. How, of course, I've held on to that old LaBelle photo and kept it close because it reminds me of a sky my mother might be occupying now, picking out her black afro until it blooms and blooms in endless dark. No one I love is immune to looking upwards on a clear night. Within the vast and open possibility of darkness, though, I had hoped for a people to find a home, or at least a dream. LaBelle grinning in the width of their spacesuits, singing songs about lonely and powerful women, songs about children going to space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hanif. I love that everything I read from you is an opening into a new world. And so I think that a lot of people are going to have a new soundtrack tonight as well. So thank you for bringing that and sharing that new work with us. So our next reader this evening is Melissa Febos. Melissa is the author of the memoir Whip Smart and the essay collection Abandon Me, which was Lambda Literary Award finalist and was named a Best Book of 2017 by Esquire, Book Riot, The Cut, Electric Literature, and so many others. Her second essay collection, which we got to see a sneak preview of the cover, the galley earlier this week, Girlhood, will be published in March of 2021. Her work has appeared in publications like the Paris Review, The Sun, Kenyon Review, Tin House, Granta, The Believer, and McSweeney's. Melissa is an associate professor at the University of Iowa, where she teaches in the nonfiction writing program. I think one of the peculiar things about working in publishing is getting to become friends with some authors, and the line between their work and the friendship can get blurred a little bit. And so when you try and write down a few lines to sum up what their work means to you, you inevitably end up writing about the person behind those words. But in Melissa's case, I think the same thing applies to my feelings about her as a friend, and my relationship to her work. On the page and in conversations, Melissa has guided me towards accountability, examination, but most of all, how to be generous, not only to those you may be in conflict with, but to myself. We've talked a lot this week at Tin House about writing as an act of love, and I can think of no better ambassador of this idea than Melissa Febos. There's a brightness to everything that you do, Melissa, and I'm so glad we got to experience that brightness this week here. Please welcome Melissa Febos.
Thank you so much, Lance. Oh God, I'm having so many feelings just in this last hour. I don't know, there were some things I was gonna say about this conference, but your closing remarks a half an hour ago were so moving and really just covered it for me. And I guess I will just leave it at, this has been an amazing week. And I've also watched this conference grow over the last few years in a way that sets a really incredible example for institutions and organizations everywhere. So I feel really proud to be a part of it. I feel nervous, which is funny because I don't usually get nervous before readings. And I was just thinking, as you were introducing me, that the only time I get nervous before readings is when people I love are in the audience. Like if my partner or my family or my very close friends are in the audience, I get the flutters, which is sort of thrilling. And I have that right now. And I think it's because there's family in this audience, and you know who you are, my class. So I'm going to also read some new work, and I sort of did a crazy fast abridged version of a really long essay right before this. So I'm definitely going to stumble over some things. But this is an essay that's from Girlhood. It's 50 pages long in the book and has all this stuff about House of Mirth and interviews and early European witch trials, but I'm not going to read any of that. I'm just going to read a couple of threads from it. And, I kept referring to this in my class this week, talking about how to structure things. And this one gave me hell. So this is for my class. And I'm so honored to have taught this week with my fellow faculty and to read with Hanif and Solmaz, who are two of my favorite writers. So this is called The Mirror Test, and it has an epigraph from Jamaica Kincaid's Girl. But what if the baker won't let me feel the bread? You mean to say that after all, you are really going to be the kind of woman who the baker won't let near the bread? In the 18th century, sluts' pennies were hard nuggets in a loaf of bread that resulted from incomplete kneading. I imagine them salty and dense, soft enough to sink your tooth into, but tough enough to stick. What could a handful of sluts' pennies get you? Nothing. A hard word, a slap in the face, a fast hand for your slow ones. Before it carried any sexual connotation, the word slut was a term for a slovenly woman, a poor housekeeper. A slut was the maid who left dust on the floor, slut's wool, who left a corner of the house overlooked in her cleaning, a slut's corner, and sometimes she was the dirt itself. A slut was a careless girl, hands sunk haphazardly into the dough, broom stilled against her shoulder, eyes cast out the window, mouth humming a song, always thinking of something else. Was I ever a messy child, a real slut in the making? My clothes tangled on the floor, my books dog-eared, their bindings split, dirty dishes on the bookshelf, sticky spoons glued to the rug I would never have bathed if not commanded. At a certain point, when I got in trouble and wanted to be seen as good again, I would clean my room, but only when I wanted to be good, not because I wanted to be clean. I already understood that goodness was something you earned, that existed only in the esteem of others. Alone in my room, I was always good, or I was never good. It was not a thing to care about alone in my room unless I was thinking about the people outside, the ways I might need them to see me. The story goes like this. In March of 1838, Darwin visited the London Zoological Society's gardens. The zoo had just acquired Jenny, a female orangutan. The scientist watched the zookeeper tease the ape with an apple. Jenny flung herself on the ground in frustration, precisely like a naughty child. Later, he watched her appraise a mirror in her cage. The visit led him to wonder about the animal's emotional landscape. Did she have a sense of fairness to offend? Did she feel wronged? And what sense of selfhood did such a reaction imply? More than a century later, his musings led to the mirror test, developed in 1970 by the psychologist William Gallup. In it, an animal is marked with a sticker or paint in an area they cannot normally see. Then they are shown a mirror. If the animal investigates the mark on their own body, they are seen to perform self-recognition. Great apes, the Eurasian magpie, dolphins, orcas, and one elephant were the only animals found to pass the test as of 2015. Just think of all the things a woman could do rather than clean, which is to say, think of all the pastimes that might make her a slut. Reading, talking, listening, thinking, eating, observing the sky, the ground, other people, or herself, picking a scab, smoking, painting, building something, daydreaming, sleeping, hatching a plan, conspiring, laughing, communing with animals, communing with God, imagining herself a god, imagining a future in which her time was her own. In Samuel Johnson's 1755 dictionary, a slut is simply a dirty woman without any sexual connotation. In the 19th century, a slut also becomes a female dog and a rag dipped in lard to light in the place of a candle. In the 1960s, a slut finally becomes a woman who enjoys sex in a degree considered shamefully excessive. It is a brilliant linguistic trajectory. Make the bad housekeeper a woman of poor morals. Make her maid service to men a moral duty, and every other act becomes a potentially immoral one. Make her a bitch, a pig, any kind of subservient or inferior beast. Create a word synonymous for them all. Make sex a moral duty too, but pleasure in it a crime. This way, you can punish her for anything. You can make her humanity monstrous. Now, you can do anything you want to her. The psychologist Henri Wallin observed that both humans and chimpanzees seem to recognize their own reflections around 6 months of age. In 1931, he published a paper in which he argued that mirrors aid in the development of a child's self-conception. 5 years later, Jacques Lacan presented his development of this idea at the 14th Annual Psychoanalytical Congress at Marienbad. He called it le stade du miroir, the mirror stage. Before it, the infant is simply a conduit of its own experience. Self-conception is piecemeal. Here's a foot, here's a hand, but maybe closer to what Lacan would later call the real. There is no I. Then The baby sees herself in the mirror. The self becomes unified and objectified simultaneously, and the uneasy grasping for a fixed subject begins. The baby can't tell the difference between the mirror self and her actual self. It is the first story she tells herself about herself, that she is her image. She's tight, they kept saying with glee about this girl or that girl. This was before tight meant good or mad, and after it meant drunk or cheap. What about me? Is it possible that I actually asked this? Of course, I was 11, though I looked older. No, you're loose as a goose. I remember exactly what I wore that day. Button-fly jeans, short sleeve shirt with a floral pattern. It must have seemed important. I must have looked down at my body to see what they saw. There was no mark, but it didn't mean it wasn't there. The role of the mirror stage is ultimately to establish a relationship between an organism and its reality, or as they say, between the Innenwelt and the Umwelt. The baby, Lacan tells us, can see herself before she can control herself. It is this temporal dialectic that makes the mirror stage a drama whose internal pressure pushes precipitously from insufficiency to anticipation. This fragmented self is reconciled by the creation of an anticipatory body, the creation of a story about the body, a fiction that will eventually harden into something else. The geese in our town shat everywhere. Their long black necks were fat as the pipes under our kitchen sink, their sleek heads identical with white feathered cheeks, their wingspan was enormous. Sometimes they flew in a V formation, their muscular wings beating in unison, their bodies in probable masses gliding over us in an arrow, honking as they sliced into the sky. I did not feel loose as a goose in the bathroom with Derek's brother's friend. I did not feel loose as a goose with Kimmy's cousin Jerry in the kitchen. I felt loose as a goose alone in my bedroom, my magnificent wings beating the air, flapping the pages of all my books. Still, I let them touch me. It seemed that my desire and theirs ought to be connected, that what drew together ought to have some shared reward, though it never did in practice. My desire found its dead end in them, and there was no easy way out. Darwin's mirror test answered the question of an animal's ability to recognize itself in its reflection, but it didn't answer his first question. Did she have a sense of fairness to offend? Did she feel wronged? And what sense of selfhood did such a reaction imply? A sense of fairness and a capacity for feeling wronged seemed to suggest humanity to Darwin. The scientist's ultimate question about Jenny was always the same. How human is she? Queen Victoria, who visited the ape in May of 1842, described Jenny in her diary as frightful and painfully and disagreeably human. Say the ape, the Eurasian magpie, or the elephant looks in the mirror and recognizes the paint smeared on her body by the researcher. The animal who passes the mirror test then investigates her own body for the offending mark. Say she finds nothing. How long before she trusts the reflection over her own body? Say the mark on her reflection is confirmed by all the other elephants. How long before her reflection replaces herself? Say the mark is not of paint, but instead a word that is applied to her. We were studying some aspect of American history, discussing a true rumor about some dead president, when my teacher said, the thing about reputations is that they are usually true. There it was, my reluctant sense of fairness, my feeling of being wronged. It bloomed in me like a corpse flower, rare and putrid. I was afraid to be angry. If I let myself get angry, I would have to face the true breadth of my own powerlessness. There are benefits to believing what they say about you. Did I argue with him? Probably not, though I knew he was wrong. Not only on behalf of my own bad reputation. What was a reputation but the story most often told about a person? Perhaps the bad stories told about white men throughout history have mostly been true by virtue of the punishment always being greatest for telling false stories about white men. But the stories those men tell about women or anyone who is not white, power is required to inflict punishment. You need a weapon to defend your own name. If you don't have one, they can say anything they want about you. I don't think my teacher meant that reputations are usually true in the Lacanian sense of a self that's built by social collaboration. He meant that if they say you're a slut, you're probably a slut, which implies that a slut is a kind of woman rather than a word used to control women's bodies. It turns out that almost everything they will call you a slut for being is a thing I want to be. I am finally loose as a goose, my wingspan unfolded its full length, my powerful neck raised as I slice into the sky. I am the same woman in the Innenwelt and the Umwelt. I am that careless girl, hands sunk haphazardly into the dough, bedroom a sty, pen stilled against her hand, eyes cast out the window, mouth humming a song, thinking of something else. I am a firework gone off in the dark, a spectacle of disobedience, a grand finale of orgasms anytime I want. I'm not interested in taking back the word slut, as I'm not interested in owning a gun. It was never mine. You won't hear me say it to any woman, not as a joke, not with pride or affection or irony. The only definition of the word that I claim is the one of a rag dipped in lard and set afire. Call me that kind of slut. Call me flashlight. Carry me through the dark if it helps. Here, take this story and watch it burn. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. I saw someone was just chatting that they could listen to that just for the rest of the night, all day, and I agree. I'm so excited to hear new work from you. Before we move on to our last reader of the evening, I wanted to give a special acknowledgement and a debt of gratitude to Mac and Rory, as well as all the other ASL interpreters that we've had this week. They've added so much to the program, and we talked a lot about being generous and acts of love, and I think that your presence here has been both of those. So Mac and Rory, thank you for joining us over the last couple weeks here, as well as all the other ASL interpreters. So our last reading of the 2020 Tin House Summer Workshop is with Solmaz Sharif. Solmaz holds degrees from UC Berkeley, where she studied and taught with June Jordan's Poetry for the People in New York University. Her work has appeared in Harper's, the Paris Review, Poetry, the Kenyon Review, and the New York Times, among others. A former Stegner Fellow at Stanford, she is currently an assistant professor of creative writing at ASU, Arizona State University. And her first poetry collection, Look, which was published by Grey Wolf Press in 2016, was a finalist for the National Book Award. I've been thinking a lot about Solmaz's work the last 2 weeks and revisiting it, not only because she's teaching with us here, but because there's something about her approach to language and subject matter that has been calling me back. As I sit in a city under federal occupation, with those perpetuating the violence saying things like, I'm just following orders, just doing my job. In Sharif's words, I find myself thinking about the distance between personal responsibility and public acts, the ways we navigate and live in between those two spaces. Solmaz's poems never allow me to retreat when I'm reading them, even when I'm reflecting. And this feeling of being present is a result of her dedication to naming the things we're afraid to name. And one other thing I just want to say in appreciation of Solmaz, just having gotten to know her a little bit over the last couple of years and her approach to her art, is I think that we're in an age where artists are often expected to be immediate and produce, be constantly producing. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Solmaz and want to make space for is for people that do take time to reflect and take time to process. I think that is also really important right now. And I see that in every poem I've ever read of Solmaz, the deep reflection and long process it took to put those words to page. I'm so glad to be welcoming Solmaz back to Tin House and to have her close out the 2020 Tin House Summer Workshop. Solmaz.
Thank you so much, Lance. And thank you, India. Thank you to all of Tin House. Thank you, Rory. I'm just so honored to be here and reading alongside Hanif and Melissa. Thank you to my group for bringing so much grace and generosity this week to our conversations and so much courage. And there was a moment I thought it would all fall apart, but we made it through. I didn't realize how controversial it was or might be to discuss ways of preparing rice. But if you want to start some intra-workshop warfare, that might be a good way to go. I am going to be reading a newer old poem. As Lance said, I take my time. And the thinking behind this poem, I mentioned it in a talk. I made my last trip to Iran in 2014. And in this last trip, something in me broke. Some kind of desire or longing that I was still holding on to, and that was so central to me, actually, evaporated. And with that evaporation, I lost language. I lost a lot of the ability to write, and I fell into a kind of despair. And I decided, instead of trying to write my way out of that despair, ignoring that despair, to try to kind of diagnose and name and enact what it was doing to my language instead. And if you are familiar with tarot, then this is kind of my tower card poem. And it's called Without Which. It opens with an epigraph from the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, as translated by Ibrahim Mohawi. And the epigraph reads, "It would be the simplest thing to say, my homeland is where I was born, but when you returned, you found nothing." What you have in your smallest city, you will have forever. And of the forever before, of which this is a brief and well-lit interruption, long as about a kiss, you carry with you in one soft-shelled suitcase. I have long loved what one can carry. I have long left all that can be left behind in the burning cities, and lost, even lost, not cared much or learned to. I turned and looked, and not even salt did I become. I have long not wanted much touch to turn away from and sleep asleep, to bring the spoon up and slurp the soup I don't notice, gone. Like that, mostly my life, until I see something new. It does not happen much, except in the sense that everything is new. 3 baby teeth in a washed, clean baby food jar, rattling as the drawer opens and closes, or the train passes underneath, or our bed bumps into the nightstand, into the wall, sliding across the room, chattering loose teeth I wanted to hold on to in a glass jar. For what? For how long? Eventually I pare down. What of me I can't stand to look at? What of me I'd never want recognized by whoever will clear out my drawers, whoever does such a thing at the end of a life, who years wanted nothing, who was dead before she died. Your wristwatch removed and ticking in this room. Your healthy walking. To watch you get dressed while still in bed, where I am most grateful to be alive, gently ticking, naked, leisurely, watching a slightly warped record turn its tiny hills, raising the needle gently. Of is such a little city and can only hold so much. Of is the thing without which I would not be, of which I am without or away from. Pity the part. I am without the kingdom, and thus of it. I am even when inside the kingdom without. Smelling the dried dill, the day-old slick fish, even my hems, wet with the gutters of the kingdom I am of, even so, more so, out of it. I was born outside, though nearby, as Lot asked to be, even if without. Behold now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live? As the dead, so I come to the city I am of, to watch play out as theater. I am audience, as the dead are audience, to the life that is not mine, is as not, as never. Is it not a little one? The crumbs have been swept from the tables, shaken from the skirts, the dates returned to their Tupperware, the last of the mourners gone. Homeland is where one's wake was held, and so no crueler word than return, no greater lie. The gates may open, but to return, more gates were built inside. Shiraz is not a single thing I know. Turning down its streets, it turns out to be such a faraway thing, a without which I have learned to be, a without which is loud, and over its houses falls the finest film of soot daily. Even if the windows are closed, the outside comes in, and through the glass panes, a man selling something, no longer by cart and call, but bullhorn and jalopy. How to say what he is selling? It is no thing this language thought worth naming, no thing I have used before. It is his life I don't see daily, not theater, not play, though I remain only audience. It is a thing he must sell daily, and every day he peddles this thing, a without which I cannot name, without which is my life. My life returned to me as story, as what I am of. Clerics and middle managers, of tanners, the boiling vats and the leather we made into buckets, what allowed water to be drawn from wells. I am as far from this as close. On the edges of the cities, our boiling vats. The tanneries do not smell good, did not. The skins boiled to loosen the flesh, to pull clean what will be leather, be bucket, to lower in a well. Out around the edge of the city is where you would find the tanners, pushed there by rot. We who at the edge of the kingdom pull dead from dead to sculpt the simplest, repeated thing, now obsolete. Leather buckets. To pull up out of the dark, a cool, shimmering surface to see yourself in. One single shimmering eye. This glimpse of myself is what I am missing, bucket by bucket, some dark, shimmering wonder. This is what I've heard was here, a wall crossed with wheat paste, black spray paint, a revolutionary palimpsest you could see from the kitchen window. The window was here, the wall was here. You could also read the graffiti from the dining room window, just across the alley, just outside the front door, which was often mad with knocking. Here, this the door you would have knocked for me. I've learned the sound of nestlings being fed. Their mad chirping now clear in the trees I walk beneath. There are languages I didn't know I wanted to know. Embarrassing to say I stopped and tilted. I've learned the sound of jets over Oakland for Fleet Week and not to wait for the bombing. Something about a nest. Something about a tree, bald and shaken free, so all its empty nests are exposed. Something about my neural pathways like that. Like is the cruelest word now, I think. To step out of my door and hope to see something like a life, something passably me. Like the cage of canaries Bubba put out to sun in the Shiraz courtyard and who dropped dead when a cat slinked by along the walls, falling onto the shit-covered newsprint with a thud. I'm embarrassed to say my small prayer. I asked for it today. My God, it was the smallest happiness. I asked for a small pool of water in an Oakland pothole, a single likeness to see, feathers lifting, then shaking free. Then something like a cat I became, to frighten dead any hopeful thing. Some days, I am almost happy, having never lived there, to lose even the loss. Some days, just to think of washing some dishes, mismatched, and in a rust-stained sink, touching things I have spent my whole life touching. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Solmaz. All right, well, another round of virtual applause, please, for Hanif, Melissa, and Solmaz. It's been another great evening here at Tin House Online at home. I don't know if we'll be back again next summer doing this. Hopefully we'll be in person, but I do know that I hope we can be together again soon. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening. And just very grateful to have been in the space the last 2 weeks.